On the morning of August 13, 2018, a pregnant mother of two, Shanann Watts, vanished without a trace. Her phone, purse, and medication were still inside the house. Her car was still in the garage. And yet, she was gone. What started as a simple welfare check would quickly unravel into one of the most shocking family murder cases in American history. It's a case that exposed the terrifying truth hiding behind the facade of a perfect family. This is the disturbing story of Chris Watts, a father who destroyed everything he had. Chris and Shanann Watts lived in Frederick, Colorado. To anyone looking in, their life was an American dream. They had two beautiful little girls, a lovely home, and a picture-perfect family image that they shared online. Shanann was energetic, driven, and very active on social media. She wasn't afraid to share her struggles and her triumphs, and people were drawn to her positivity. Above all, she adored her daughters, Bella and Celeste. They were her entire world, but behind the filtered photos and cheerful posts, their marriage was silently falling apart. The couple was drowning in financial stress, having declared bankruptcy just a few years earlier. They were trying to get back on their feet, but the pressure was always there, simmering right below the surface. Shanann's work required her to travel often, and that summer, the emotional distance between her and Chris grew wider and wider. Then, a devastating secret came to light. Chris was having an affair with a coworker. It was a secret he would later admit he would do anything to protect. This affair became the catalyst, the spark that would ignite an unthinkable tragedy. On August 12th, Shanann was in Arizona for a business trip. She sent Chris worried messages about their relationship, asking him if he even wanted to be married anymore. She could feel the distance, but she couldn't have imagined the real reason for it. Late that night, she flew back home. Her friend, Nicole Atkinson, dropped her off around 1:48 in the morning. That was the last time anyone would ever see Shanann alive. Inside the house, Chris was waiting. What happened next was beyond horrifying. In his later confession, Chris described an argument about their failing marriage, about separating, and about the affair he was so desperate to hide. Shanann told him she knew something was wrong, and then, in what he called a moment of uncontrolled rage, he strangled his pregnant wife, ending two lives at once, Shanann and their unborn son, Nico. But the nightmare was far from over. Their two little girls woke up. 4-year-old Bella walked in and asked a question that would haunt the world. "What's wrong with mommy?" Chris didn't answer. Instead, he carried out a cold, calculated plan that would send shockwaves across the globe. The next morning, when Shanann missed her 10 a.m. doctor's appointment, her friend Nicole knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. Shanann never, ever missed appointments, especially not for her pregnancy. Nicole drove straight to the Watts home and began calling Chris over and over. When he finally showed up, she insisted they check inside the house. The police were called for a welfare check, and the body cam footage from that moment would become a critical piece of evidence. Inside, officers found Shannon's purse, her phone, her keys, and her medication. The children's favorite blankets were still there. Nothing suggested she had left willingly. And through it all, Chris appeared bizarrely calm, detached, almost robotic. As the officer took notes, Nicole whispered to him, "Something's not right." She was absolutely correct. A neighbor offered to let police review his security camera footage. The video, from the early hours of that morning, showed something unusual. Chris was seen backing his truck all the way into the garage, something he never did. He then spent several minutes loading things into the truck bed. As the neighbor replayed the footage, he pulled the officer aside, away from Chris, and whispered, "He's not acting right. I've never seen him talk so much. Something's really off." Meanwhile, Chris just stood there, nervously folding his arms, rocking back and forth as he watched the screen. Police suspicion instantly turned to him. The very next day, Chris appeared on local television, pleading for his family's safe return. He looked into the camera and said, "Shanann, if you're out there with the kids, just come back. This house isn't the same." But anyone watching could sense that something was strange. His expression was flat, his voice was hollow, and his eyes were cold. The detectives watching the broadcast saw the exact same thing. A man putting on a terrible performance, pretending to be concerned, and failing miserably. Behind the scenes, investigators were closing in, and fast. They found major inconsistencies in Chris's story. His phone data directly contradicted his timeline of events, and they had proof of his affair. The walls were closing in around him. Chris was brought in for questioning by the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. At first, he denied everything, repeating the same rehearsed lines. Then came the polygraph test. When it was over, the examiner looked him in the eye and said it plainly, "Chris, you did not pass." In fact, he failed the test so completely that even the seasoned investigators were shocked. Now confronted with undeniable proof he was lying, Chris finally cracked, but only a little. He spun a new horrific story. He claimed that Shanann had killed their daughters, and that he had only killed her in a fit of rage and panic. The investigators didn't believe him for a second. They continued to press him. Then came the final blow. His father, Ronnie, was brought into the interrogation room. Seeing his dad, Chris broke down, sobbing, and confessed. He finally admitted that he had killed Shanann. He admitted the kids were gone. It was enough to arrest him on the spot. But the full monstrous truth wouldn't be revealed until weeks later. In a prison interview, Chris finally confessed everything. He killed Shanann in their bedroom. He then dragged her body down the stairs as his daughters cried. He loaded all 3 of their bodies into his truck and drove them to a remote oil field owned by his employer. There, he smothered his daughter's first 2-year-old Celeste, then 4-year-old Bella. Bella's final words would break the world's heart. "Daddy, no." Chris then dropped their small bodies into separate oil tanks and buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. The brutality of his actions was almost impossible to comprehend. And through it all, Chris showed almost no remorse. On November 19, 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 84 years. The judge who sentenced him called his crimes the most vicious and inhumane he had ever seen in his career. Today, Chris Watts spends his days in isolation in a maximum security prison. He claims he thinks about what he did every single day, but many experts believe he only says that because he was caught. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and their unborn son, Nico, are remembered by millions of people all over the world. Their tragic story has raised critical awareness about hidden domestic abuse, toxic relationships, and the immense danger of trusting appearances. The Watts case teaches us all one painful, terrifying lesson. Sometimes, evil doesn't look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a smiling family man, standing right beside you. Thank you for watching. If you found this story important, please consider subscribing for more in-depth analyses of cases that have changed our world. Stay safe out there.